Blackwood Forest has always been a place shrouded in mystery and fear. For generations, the townsfolk whispered tales of a spectral figure that roamed the woods, its presence heralded by eerie whispers and an unnerving chill. As an aspiring journalist, I felt compelled to uncover the truth behind these legends. Armed with a camera, a notebook, and an insatiable curiosity, I set out to investigate the urban legend that had haunted my town for as long as anyone could remember. Day 1, The Gathering of Stories. The sun hung low in the sky as I approached the edge of Blackwood Forest. The air grew noticeably cooler, and a sense of unease settled over me. I decided to begin my investigation by speaking to the locals who lived near the forest's edge. My first stop was Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly woman who had lived in the town her entire life. Her eyes widened with fear as she recounted her encounter with the figure. Mrs. Jenkins? It was a foggy evening. I saw it standing among the trees, a tall, shadowy figure. It whispered my name and the air turned frigid. I ran and never looked back. I recorded her account, noting the terror in her eyes. Next, I spoke to Mr. Thompson, a retired park ranger who had spent years patrolling the forest. Mr. Thompson, I've seen it too. It appears at dusk just as the light fades. It whispers and the temperature drops suddenly. I've lost count of the number of people who have gone missing after venturing too deep into those woods. As I continued gathering stories, a pattern emerged. Each encounter described the figure in the same way: tall, dark, and whispering. The sense of dread in their voices was palpable, adding to the growing unease that settled in my stomach. Day 2, Into the Heart of Darkness. Armed with the knowledge and stories from the locals, I ventured into Blackwood Forest the next day. The dense canopy above allowed only slivers of sunlight to pierce through, casting an otherworldly glow on the path ahead. The forest seemed alive, every rustle of leaves and snap of twigs amplifying my growing apprehension. Hours passed, and the sun began to set. The deeper I went, the quieter it became, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. The path narrowed, and the trees closed in around me, their gnarled branches resembling skeletal fingers reaching out to ensnare me. Suddenly, I felt a chill creep up my spine. The temperature had dropped dramatically and my breath became visible in the air. Then, I heard it, the whispers. They were faint at first, indistinguishable from the rustling leaves, but grew louder and clearer with each step I took. My heart pounded as I followed the sound, the whispers seeming to surround me, calling my name, urging me deeper into the forest. My flashlight flickered, casting long shadows that danced menacingly on the forest floor. I pressed on, driven by a mix of fear and determination. Day 3, The First Encounter. Night had fully fallen when I saw it for the first time, a tall, shadowy figure standing motionless among the trees. My breath caught in my throat as the whispers intensified. The figure turned slowly, revealing hollow eyes that seemed to pierce my very soul. "Leave," it whispered, its voice a chilling echo that reverberated through the forest. "Leave or suffer the consequences." I stood frozen, unable to move as the figure advanced. The cold became unbearable, my breath visible in the air. Summoning all my courage, I lifted my camera and snapped a photo. The flash momentarily illuminated the figure, revealing a face twisted in agony. Suddenly, the whispers turned into anguished screams. The figure lunged at me and I stumbled backward, falling to the ground. My camera shattered, its light extinguished. In the darkness, I could feel the figure's presence looming over me. I don't remember how I managed to escape Blackwood Forest. The next thing I knew, I was at the edge of the woods, gasping for breath and drenched in sweat. The whispers were gone, replaced by the familiar sounds of the night. Shaken but alive, I returned to town, my mind racing with what I had experienced. The locals watched me with a mix of curiosity and fear as I recounted my tale. Mrs. Jenkins was the first to approach, her eyes filled with sympathy. "You saw it, didn't you?" she asked softly. I nodded, still haunted by the memory. Day 4. The investigation continues. Despite the terror I had experienced, I was determined to uncover more about the figure. I spent the next day combing through old town records and speaking to more locals. One name kept coming up: Jacob Hawthorne, a reclusive historian who had spent years researching the legends of Blackwood Forest. I found Jacob in his cluttered study, surrounded by books and old maps. He greeted me with a wary smile, his eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and caution. "I've been expecting you," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "You encountered the Whisperer, didn't you?" I nodded, recounting my experience in detail. Jacob listened intently, his expression growing graver with each word. "The Whisperer is an ancient spirit," he explained. "It's said to be the restless soul of a man who was wronged and left to die in the forest centuries ago. The whispers are his cries for justice, and those who hear them are often never seen again." Jacob showed me an old, faded map of the forest marked with symbols and notes. "There are places within Blackwood Forest where the veil between our world and the spirit world is thin. These are where the Whisperer is most often seen." Armed with this new information, I felt both a sense of dread and determination. I knew I had to return to the forest, to find the thin places and uncover the truth once and for all. Day 5. The Final Confrontation. I returned to Blackwood Forest with a heavy heart and a clear goal. The forest seemed even more foreboding than before, the shadows longer and the air colder. I followed Jacob's map, navigating the twisted paths and dense underbrush. As dusk fell, I reached the first of the thin places, a small clearing surrounded by ancient trees. The air was thick with a palpable tension, and the whispers began anew. They were louder this time, more insistent, and I could feel the presence of the Whisperer growing stronger. I set up my camera, determined to capture evidence of the spirit. The whispers grew deafening, and the temperature plummeted. Suddenly, the figure appeared before me, more distinct and terrifying than ever. "Why have you returned?" it whispered, its voice a haunting echo. "I want to help you," I replied, my voice shaking. "Tell me what happened to you. Let me share your story." The figure's hollow eyes bore into mine, and for a moment the whispers ceased. The forest fell silent, and the figure's form wavered, as if caught between worlds. "I was betrayed," it finally said, its voice filled with sorrow and rage. "Left to die by those I trusted. My spirit cannot rest until justice is served." I felt a surge of empathy for the tormented soul. "How can I help you find peace?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. The figure pointed to a spot on the ground. "There," it whispered. "My remains lie buried beneath the earth. Bring them to light and my spirit may finally be free." With trembling hands I began to dig. The earth was cold and unyielding, but I persisted, driven by the need to help the restless soul. Hours passed, and finally I unearthed a skeletal hand, clutching a tarnished locket. As I lifted the locket, the figure began to fade, its form growing fainter. "Thank you," it whispered, its voice filled with gratitude. "I can finally rest." The whispers ceased and the air grew warmer. The oppressive presence lifted, and for the first time in days, I felt a sense of peace. I carefully reburied the remains, marking the spot with a makeshift cross. Epilogue. A new beginning. I returned to town, my mind and heart heavy with the weight of my experience. The locals listened in awe as I recounted my journey and the final encounter with the Whisperer. Mrs. Jenkins and Mr. Thompson, along with many others, expressed their gratitude, relieved that the restless spirit had found peace. Jacob Hawthorne published my story, and it quickly became a sensation. People from all over came to visit Blackwood Forest, not to seek out the Whisperer, but to pay their respects to a soul who had finally found rest. As for me, I had learned a valuable lesson. Some truths are worth uncovering, no matter the cost. Blackwood Forest remains a place of mystery, but its darkest legend has been laid to rest. The whispers have faded, replaced by the peaceful sounds of nature, and the town has found a sense of closure. But every now and then, on a foggy evening, I think I hear a faint whisper in the distance, a reminder of the legend that once was and the spirit that found peace at last.